Hey guys, this is part 2 of our series on mental toughness, and today I'm going to talk to you about complete ownership. Well, complete ownership, what is it? It is a concept that goes hand in hand with complete acceptance, and the concept is pretty similar to Jocko Willink's radical ownership. Now, I prefer the term complete because I think this idea should not be radical at all. It should be basic human awesomeness 101, and it's pretty easy to understand. Complete ownership and complete acceptance, they're like two peas in a pod. You can't have one without the other. And together they make you way more solid as a human being. But what do we mean by complete ownership? Well, the word complete means lacking nothing. Perfect. And ownership means taking authority and responsibility over yourself. So complete ownership, it means a complete ownership and authority and responsibility over your own self. Now, this is not exactly rugged individualism. You may have heard of that, this whole pull yourself up by your bootstrap mentality. Not all about that. Rugged individualism kind of denies the help that you received along the way, and it minimizes the importance of your community and how helpful they can be, especially because, hey, no one succeeds in total isolation. Also, complete ownership is not a political statement. It may seem a little bit like libertarianism, and it does share some similar values, but it's asking a different question. Rather than what do we do with the world, complete ownership only asks this question. Given my current situation, what am I going to do? You see, everyone gets different starting points in life. Family, personality, intelligence, time, place, abuse history, culture, current events, finances, our place in the world, history, on and on and on. You didn't choose any of those. You're just responding to them. None of these are your fault, but they are your responsibility. And by the way, this belief of complete ownership should lead to much greater humility and much less judgment. Why? Well, it's easy to judge others. You didn't have to go through what they went through. You don't have the same experiences. It's easy to look at Nazi Germany and judge them, but what's the chance that you would have been the Oskar Schindler or the Dietrich Bonhoeffer, rather than the people who just went along with it? It's easy to judge America in the 1800s, but what's the chance that you would have been the only abolitionist in your community? Hopefully you would be. But does anyone have a clear picture of what our culture's missing currently? What things are we going to look back on in 200 years and just find them barbaric or at least misguided? My point is this. Everyone has their own struggles in life that you know nothing about, so stop judging them and focus your energy on yourself. What are you missing? What are you doing that's not working? Where do you notice the perpetual frustration, the anxiety, the pain? Judge for yourself. How are things going? Now, some of us might say it's wrong to judge yourself. You shouldn't judge yourself at all. Wrong. You shouldn't judge yourself unfairly. But if you stop judging yourself, the only thing that will happen is you'll be out of step with reality. That's what'll happen. What do we call that? We call that delusion. Now, it's not wrong to judge yourself. I think it's necessary. But how do you judge yourself? Well, I think you judge yourself in two ways. Number one, you judge yourself based on who you were yesterday, who you are today, and who you could become tomorrow. If you see that you're doing well, you should see that you're less stupid and less foolish than you were 20 years ago, 10 years ago, even a few months ago. And you might expect that that's going to continue. You're not in competition with anyone else. You're in competition against your potential. And here's good news with that. A, there's always room for improvement. There's always something to do. And B, you do not know what the upper limit of this is. Failure to judge yourself properly either means that you'll continue to do the same mistakes or you'll just become bitter. And truly, bitterness is the emotion that people feel when they get stuck. When they stop judging themselves properly and they just hold on tight for a few decades. Think of someone who's in their 70s and 80s who's just cranky, bitter, just difficult to be around. Ask somebody how they got there. And what are they going to say? Well, I've actually asked this question a few times, and what they inevitably say is they've always been this way. They've always been this way. For the last 20, 30, 40 years, They've always just been this way, you see? This is the result of somebody who just planted their flag in their 30s and said, all right, no new friends, no more education. I'm not going to challenge my beliefs. I'm just going to go to work until retirement. Bitter, 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 bitter. Now, think of somebody who's in their 70s and 80s and they're thriving. How did they get there? The answer? Perpetual growth. Learning, making new friends, loving their family, making hard choices. They've been judging themselves based on who they were and who they are now and who they could become their entire life. And so are we surprised by the difference? You see, and this is my second point, beliefs are tools. They're tools. My question for you, is the tool working? If a belief doesn't work, it's a bad tool. It's time to change it. Remember, if your beliefs aren't working, it's not reality's fault, it's your fault. Getting angry at reality for not conforming to your belief system, that's narcissism. That's delusion. That's also what makes people bitter. Now, don't let others judge you. You judge you. And don't judge yourself as good or bad, enough or not enough, because you're not good or bad. You're a mixture of good and bad. And judging yourself in totality as good or bad is just shame language. So is judging yourself as not strong enough, pretty enough, rich enough, funny enough, good enough, attractive enough, and so on and so on. That's actually shame language, and shame is bullshit. How do I know it's bullshit? Well, shame language never leads to positive change. It leads towards hopelessness and defeat. Why? Because it assumes you can judge yourself in totality by one dimension, and even worse, that one dimension doesn't have any measurement typically. I'll give you an example. Somebody might say to me, hey, I'm not smart enough to get into college. And you might ask that person, well, what does smart enough look like? Answer, they don't know. Or maybe they'll just pick some other person. Well, she's smart enough, right? Someone else might say, well, she cheated on me because I'm not good enough for her. Okay, fine. Ask that person, well, so how good do you have to be for her to accept you and love you and never cheat on you? Who knows? The answer, the point I'm trying to point out here is, if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist. You're probably asking the wrong question. Chances are you're smart enough to get into some college programs, but not MIT. Chances are, if she cheated on you and you believe you aren't good enough, you still falsely believe that you can earn and love commitment. And, shocking, you can't. Love isn't something you can earn. And hey, you were at least good enough to have a relationship with in the first place. So once again, beliefs are tools. And you measure that tool by how well it navigates reality. Well, I have a phrase that I use personally that I think sums this up. My phrase is, no one judges me but me and God. And I say this phrase to myself with some pretty strong language sometimes. Why? Because my voice needs to be louder than the voice of others. I need to listen to others and see what they might see, because maybe they see something that I don't. I need to compare how my beliefs shape up to theirs. But it's never a good idea for me to allow somebody to force their beliefs on me. I need my own voice to be the loudest. I need my own voice to be the loudest voice in my life. I need my words to be the words that guide me. I need to be the driver behind the steering wheel. And if I'm judging myself based on who I was yesterday, who I am today, and who I'll become tomorrow, updating my belief system when that tool isn't working, I will stay on the road and I'll get where I need to go. Now, the opposite of complete ownership is often what people call the victim mindset or the victim mentality. The victim mentality looks like someone shoved into an inner tube going down the river, if you remember our last video. No ability to navigate. They're just kind of stuck there, and they just keep hitting the same rocks and complaining about it. And they feel their powerlessness in their body, and they just submerge with murky water, and who even knows what's under there. It looks like somebody driving a car with a blindfold on. I've often found the victim mindset occurs in people who have never really tested themselves against real hardship. Or sometimes they are people who have been victimized, sometimes repeatedly as children or when they were younger, and they were just never taught how to manage or navigate that. And the result is the same. When I see the victim mindset, I often see someone who just doesn't trust themselves. And they resist the concept of complete ownership because failing feels bad, and you can sometimes avoid the feeling by letting others make decisions for you and shouldering the burdens of your life. So, example of a victim mindset. All right, number one, people who yell at the news or get overly involved in politics, right? As if the government's going to solve my problems. As if, if for some miracle, all of us got together and agreed on things and made the right decisions, as if that's ever happened in human history, then my life will be better. Can it have an impact? Sure. Right? Does yelling at Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, does that actually going to produce anything? No, it's going to confirm my victim mindset. Does the news feed off that? Yeah, they do. Yeah, they do. What about immature people in a relationship? Oh, my husband's the problem. Or if she was just different. That's the example of the victim mindset. Right? They're focusing on how other people should change, not thinking at all about what they could do about it. What about immature parents? Why won't my kids just get it straight? I've told you 1,000 times. I've told you 1,000,000 times. Why won't my kids listen to me? How about try something different? Update that belief. Update your tactics. What about people who complain about the weather, the economy, the government? Aches and pains, traffic, interest rates. Oh, kids these days. Oh, those millennials. Oh, that inflation, right? This is the victim mindset. It looks like someone who's drowning. All they're doing is sitting there going, help me, somebody save me. And hey, if somebody is drowning, sure, go save them. But if they keep going out into the deep end, it's time to teach them how to swim or just let them fail. Otherwise, you will perpetually become their life preserver. The point is, you may have been victimized, but you're not a victim right now. Victim is an identity statement. And ultimately, you are in charge of constructing your own identity. This is complete ownership. John Deloney, one of my favorites on YouTube, he uses the phrase, not by my hands, but in my lap. I love that phrase. And this is very similar to the Stoic idea of you can't control what happened, but you can control what happens next. And this should be some good news, because the more you take responsibility for, the more in control you are. The more in control you are, the more competent you'll become. The more competent you become, the more confident and stable you'll be. Conversely, the more responsibility you avoid, the less in control you are. The less in control you are, the more incompetent you'll become. The more incompetent you become, the less you will trust yourself. And the more anxious and depressed you'll be. And the more you'll complain. My favorite quote from Eckhart Tolle is this: when you complain, you make yourself to be a victim. Accept the situation, change the situation, or leave the situation. Everything else is madness. Let me repeat this. When you complain, you make yourself to be a victim. Accept the situation, change the situation, or leave the situation. Everything else is madness. I subscribe to that wholeheartedly. You see, complaining doesn't solve the problem. It only heightens the distress of it and confirms how helpless and powerless you are. How about, instead of complaining to others, seek wisdom? Expose your foolishness to those who can help you not be so foolish. This is complete ownership. Here's an example of what complete ownership looks like in practice. Attempting to understand your situation, then adapt to it. Focusing on being a good wife or a good husband and not, quote-unquote, saving the marriage or trying to change your spouse. When faced with a poor work environment, change the environment, accept it as is, or leave the job, just like Eckhart Tolle said. How about enforcing decisive boundaries instead of trying to convince people or change them? What about spending time every day and week listening to your emotions, making decisions, knowing that sometimes you must decide between two bad options and you'll have to choose between the least bad option? What about taking responsibility for everything you have in your life? Updating your belief system as needed, admitting your faults, admitting your limitations, being intentional with your time and money, instead of just feeling too busy or being too broke, analyzing relationship problems and coming up with potential solutions instead of conflict and avoidance. I'm sure there's more examples, and I'd love to hear them, so please leave an example in the comment section. But for now, I hope I've explained complete ownership as best I can. Love you guys. Take care. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.